Hi there, how are you? I am back with another letter in the consciousness series, the A to Z of consciousness. I am Aanchal Bedi, a certified Theta Healer, an Access Consciousness practitioner, and the founder at Solution Healing. And just like that, it's another Wednesday, and we are talking about H. We have reached the letter H. H for hedonism. Yes, hedonism. I know that's a new word. That could be a new word for a lot of you here. And I'm here to introduce that word, the definition of that word, and how that is connected to consciousness, and why I chose to speak about hedonism today. And if any of you went through the stories of Solution Healing today, I asked you guys, what is the definition of pleasure for you? What does pleasure mean to you, and what is your most pleasurable memory, and what is the thing that brings you most pleasure? So, talking about hedonism, so let's, I think, just go right at it. Hedonism is this pursuit of pleasure. When in life you are seeking pleasure, when in life your entire motivation for any choice that you make, or any decision that you take, is decided by, oh, is there pleasure if I choose that? Or is that going to be fun? Is that going to be joyful? Is that going to be a lot of madness and joy if I choose that? That is hedonism. And when I learned about this word, I learned about it in one of my Access Consciousness classes. The co-creator of Access Consciousness, he defines and describes himself as the greatest hedonist of all times. And he says, I am always looking for possibilities, magic, miracles, and pleasure in all areas, all aspects of life. And when I would hear him say that, I would be like, is that even possible? Can you actually have so much of pleasure in all areas of your life? What is this hedonism all about? And so this week, when it came and I had to speak about any letter from H which was working best in the theory of access consciousness, I thought about studying this entire concept of hedonism, and it took me a few days to get to know about it. And when I started reading about it, oh my god, the information that came to me, the awarenesses that came to me were mind-blowing, and I want to share all of that with you in detail. So thank you to all of you for joining in. I am glad to have you all today. And okay, so let me start with the philosophy, with the age-old concept of hedonism. Just like any cult or any practice, this is this is like an age-old practice, and hedonism comes from this Greek word which means pleasure, which means sweet, which means pleasant. So it came from the Greek word, and back in the day, I think centuries ago, there would be a group of people who would only see life, the entire aim of life, to be pleasure, to always maximize their pleasure and to minimize pain. That was what they were seeking. And there were many people doing that until, of course, there was some criticism that came into place, and hedonism hedonism was not very popular after that criticism came into place. So when we are talking about the word pleasure can have negative connotations. And if I ask you, would anybody like to answer over here, that when you hear the word pleasure, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? So I asked people that on the page today, and I got answers like, oh, pleasure is all about sex. It could be your bodily pleasures. It could be anything related to having 2-3 glasses of wine. So you see, our mind, when it comes to this word pleasure, directly goes to this limited view, limited mindset, that it's all about physical pleasures, it's all about having alcohol and having drugs. And because of this misconception, the entire concept of hedonism became very unpopular back in the day, and people stopped choosing hedonism. People stopped looking for pleasure because pleasure was made so wrong. And why I bring this topic up today in A to Z of consciousness is because And I think now it's time to go beyond all of those misconceptions. Now is the time to go beyond all of those wrongness and the negativity and all of these misconceptions attached to the word pleasure. So when you hear this statement, it goes like, all of life comes to me with ease, joy, and glory. That's literally the tagline of Access Consciousness. And when you hear that, there is this sense of ease and joy and glory that you must invite in your life. And you see, pleasure is a part of joy. Pleasure, you choose pleasure so you can have more joy. But if you have so many negative connotations, negative definitions of pleasure, you will never be able to invite joy in your life. Joy will not be a possibility for you. So let's start this entire conversation of hedonism by changing our definitions, of what pleasure is. So pleasure is not only related to sex, drugs, and alcohol. Pleasure can be holding a mother holding her baby in her arms for the first time. Pleasure could be screaming out at the top of your lungs on a roller coaster. Pleasure can be just sliding into your bed, really comfy bed, after a long, long day at work. Pleasure can be earning so much money that you actually end up gifting your father his dream car. So pleasure has many examples. Pleasure is different for everyone, and pleasure can absolutely fit into all areas of life, and that is exactly what I am going to be focusing on today. Pleasure can be your morning cup of tea. Pleasure can be listening to music. Pleasure can be dancing like wild. Pleasure could be anything. Pleasure could be spending some pleasure could be going for a beautiful date, having a wonderful conversation with your partner. So pleasure is not only about your physical pleasures. Pleasure is just choosing joy in all areas, all aspects of life. So, going deeper into this, why was hedonism? Hedonism obviously got a bad reputation because of these definitions, which I hope I'm trying to bring a change in. Also, hedonism got a bad name, reason being that back in the day it was concluded that anything related to pleasure can become addictive. So, you must have heard sex addicts, alcohol addicts, drug addicts. Okay, so directly the concept of pleasure is related to addiction, that oh, if I choose this kind of pleasure in my life, I could get addicted, and I don't want any kind of addiction, so I must never ever choose pleasure for myself. So let me just change this entire concept, this entire hedonism word into this term called conscious hedonism. Okay, let's look at this in a conscious way. Now, what is conscious hedonism? Conscious hedonism is when you choose pleasures in life with a choice, not with a compulsion, not with addiction, not with a necessity that, oh my god, now I'm dependent on it. I am dependent on this kind of pleasure. I must have a glass of alcohol before I go off to sleep. That is dependence. That is addiction. That is not you choosing pleasure. The entire concept of conscious hedonism is all about having an element of choice. Let me explain that better. In one of my sessions, I met with this guy. He was speaking about how he was kind of addicted, not addicted, he was into this habit of smoking joints every now and then. He's like, what do you think about it? What do? I don't want to be smoking joints. And I'm like, okay, then don't. And then I simply asked him one question. I said, are you doing this smoking thing out of an addiction, or are you doing it out of choice? And he took a moment to actually think about that, and then he said, no, I'm definitely doing it out of choice, because there are days that I don't do it and I'm feeling fine, and there are days that I just really want to do it and it gives me pleasure. I said, okay, fine, then why do you need my help? So if any kind of a pleasure is a choice for you, and you can choose to have it one day and choose not to have it the next day, then you are operating from conscious hedonism, because the element of choice exists. You are getting into addiction, compulsion, dependency when there is no choice, when you must have a pleasure available to you, otherwise you'll go mad, otherwise you will not be able to operate. Now that is dependency, and that is unconscious hedonism, which is not what we're talking about over here. Please choose pleasure from motivation, not compulsion. Please choose pleasure as a source from an element of choice, not dependency. Okay, so like I said, conscious hedonism is all about choice. And we're all hedonists. We're all greatest hedonists. If not today, we have been in our past. Because if you see children, kids are great hedonists. You give kids a box, like, empty cartons, they'll build a fort out of it. That's their power, that's their capacity. They look for miracles, they look for possibilities, they look for pleasure in everything. And if we could do that once upon a time when we were kids, we can do that even now. So where did all of that go? It went away because as we grew up from being children to now being adults, we kind of stopped being that crazy fun person and looking for possibilities and magics and mysteries everywhere. We started becoming more rational, more serious, more logical. Okay, and we said, no, we can't just start looking for joy, fun, pleasure, and everything. We've got to get serious, because only if you're serious will your life sort out. Okay, so all of that element of seriousness came in, the pragmatics of order came in, the control mechanism came in, and it just took away our hedonistic capacities from us. So now that I've explained the idea of hedonism to you, I'm sure you have this question in your mind that, Aanchal, okay, fine, we've got the concept of hedonism. Now just tell us how to be it so we can make our way out of here. So yeah, I will be telling you all of that. We are at Solution Healing. I am going to give you all the solutions possible. And another question that could be coming to your mind is, oh, you're telling us about this concept of hedonism. Are you the greatest hedonist ever? Are you practicing what you preach? So to that, I would like to say that it's like me having a look at a wonderful brochure of this exotic location that I'm planning to go to, that I'm going to embark my journey onto soon, and I'm inviting you to come with me. So take it like that. I want you guys to choose hedonism as I choose it. I want you guys to invite the energy of pleasure as I do it. Okay, and I am not saying that I am maximizing my pleasure in all areas of my life, but at least now I'm being aware that that is a possibility, and I'm going to choose it. And I want you to come with me on that journey, because once I become the true hedonist of all times, I don't know what I'll be, where I'll be, and how that will be like. So now that I have the time to connect with you guys, I would love to share this piece of information, and let's go on this mad journey of seeking pleasure together. So how to be the greatest hedonist of all times? Like I said, hedonism, conscious hedonism, is a choice. To have it, you've got to choose it. That's the answer. That's the simple answer. How to be a hedonist, how to maximize my pleasure. So in order to understand that better, in order to explain that better rather, I have kind of created these reasons, these broad categories that don't allow us to choose pleasure in our life, that don't allow us to be the greatest hedonists of all times. And I want to explain that to you in detail with lots of examples, and I want you to listen carefully. I want you to see where you fit in. Where are you in all of these categories fitting in and reducing your pleasure and maximizing your displeasure? So let's go into these broad categories. There are 6 of them. So I'm going to give, like every topic like a few minutes and lots of examples so you guys get it better. So number 1 is, I will not choose pleasure. I will not be a hedonist because pleasure is wrong. So how many of us together believe that pleasure is wrong? Because we were conditioned to believe that. We were implanted to believe that no, never choose pleasure. Pleasure isn't good. And it's like, somebody putting this chip inside your mind, that artificial intelligence, that chip, that microchip that always makes you believe, no matter what, that pleasure is bad, don't choose it, never choose it. And I want to explain that with an example. So let's talk about the most common, thing when it comes to pleasure. The most obvious thing is sex. Okay, let's talk about that. Now, sex is okay. It's okay for sex to be pleasurable for men. Okay, but for women, if a woman would desire the pleasure of sex, then you can imagine the number of labels that could be attached onto her. Okay, let's not even go to the labels right now. And why is that? Because we are conditioned to believe, women are conditioned and programmed to believe that sex is only an act of reproduction and they should never be able to desire it. And if they are desiring it, they have to maintain it as a secret, and if they let it out in the open, they are going to be tagged as evil, terrible, wicked, horrible, and all of those things. Now, why is that? Now, that is the value of conditioning. You see how women have been conditioned, especially with media. So, women are objectified on mainstream. There are item numbers. So many movies are all about, the media is so strongly representing women as sex objects, and that makes it okay for men to have a desire for sex and to have sex for pleasure. But if women were to have the same kind of desires, they would be labeled as horrible, terrible, wicked women who just have this single sightedness. Okay, so that was just one example of sex. Now, a lot of people believe that money is evil. A lot of people have this wrongness attached to too much money. A lot of people have this, they have this belief that money is the root of all evil. And if I get too much money, I'm going to become this evil, horrible person who will start manipulating people and who'll be greedy for more, and who'll always kind of, see people, the people who are not as rich as them, as somebody who's inferior. So a lot of people have this point of view that if I have too much money, it will make me evil. So you see, there is this energy of wrongness attached to having too much money. And when you have that kind of a point of view, you will never be able to invite the pleasure of money in your life. And there are a lot of people who are really wealthy, but they don't have the pleasure of spending. And even if they're spending on their medicines, they're spending on their court cases, they're not receiving the pleasure of spending because they have a point of view that too much money is bad. So all of that conditioning, all of that implantation, all of that programming that has been kind of shoved into your mind, into your subconscious from years and lifetime, that money is bad, that sex is bad, and all of that conditioning that doesn't allow you to choose the pleasures of life, because you are so afraid of being the horrible, terrible, wicked one. Once you start choosing that pleasure, can you please now destroy and uncreate that? Awesome. Right and wrong, good and bad, pot and pock, online shots, boys and beyonds. And that statement that I just spoke out, that is an access consciousness clearing statement that is designed to kind of just release all of the blockages that are stuck in your subconscious and allow you to create change. So everywhere you're not being able to change your points of view of money being bad or something else being bad, this one clearing statement can create that shift for you. So that was one thing, that we don't want to choose pleasure, we don't want to be hedonists, because we have negative implantation, programming and conditioning of certain things in our lives. Second reason why we don't choose pleasure in our life is because no one else is choosing. So if no one else is choosing pleasure around me, like nobody in my family is choosing, none of my friends are choosing, how can I choose pleasure? Like how can I be the odd one out? And how can I be this selfish one who is always choosing my own pleasure? I can't do that. So this actually, I got this realization while I was working on this woman. She's an old lady and she is dependent on a lot of medication. She's always been, for the last I think 3 decades of her life, she's been on a lot of medication. Her body always keeps falling sick, and there is something or the other going wrong in her life with her physical health. And while working on her with Theta Energies, we came down to this awareness. Like she herself said that I'm not willing to have that much pleasure in my life because my sisters don't have it. My sisters are going through a major trauma in their life. One is, one has a physical trauma, one has a relationship trauma, one has a financial issue. So if they are so troubled, it's not even like okay for me to have so much of ease in my life. So you see, one of the greatest reasons why we don't choose pleasure is because people around us are not choosing it. So you don't want to be the only odd one out who is choosing ease and happiness and pleasure for themselves. So please ask yourself, who must receive pleasure? Who must have ease before you can have pleasure? Who have you put on that hierarchy that, okay, this one must receive pleasure before me, and I can never be the evil one to choose pleasure only for myself? So everything that is, everywhere you've made lists, and there's this hierarchy system that somebody else must receive pleasure for me to receive pleasure. Can you please now destroy and uncreate that for good? Right and wrong, good and bad, pot and pock, online shots, boys and beyonds. Awesome, guys. The third reason why we don't choose these hedonistic capacities in our lives is because you feel that, oh my god, I'm not deserving of pleasure. I've not done anything great in my life. Like, why should I even have pleasure? What great have I done? Like, I'm not even like successful at my work life. My relationships are not doing very well. I keep falling sick. I don't have self care. I don't have self love. So, for what do I deserve pleasures? Let me tell you something. Pleasure has nothing to do with being deserving. Pleasure is not to deserve, pleasure is to have. It is your birthright. So you don't have to be this master in all areas of your life to be able to deserve pleasure. Okay, pleasure is to have. It's if you were born with these pleasure capacities, if you were born with hedonistic capacities being a child, that means it's your birthright, right? It comes, it's like you were born with it, and why would you now want to deserve it? So a lot of people feel that, oh, I've had failed relationships, oh, my businesses are failing, I'm not doing well in life, I have no reason to deserve pleasure. So forget it. When I'm successful, when I achieve something, then I'll choose pleasure. And the most common example is people saying that I will have pleasure once I retire. I want to retire, I want to make lots of money. Until then, I'm going to work my ass off. Uske baad, I'll start thinking about pleasure. After that, I'm going to take my wife and kids for a nice world tour, and that's my plan of action. But before that, I have lots to do. So all of the milestones that you have decided that you must achieve before you start choosing pleasure in your life, can you please now destroy and uncreate that and choose pleasure in the moment? Because you bloody hell don't need to deserve it. You just gotta have it, gotta choose it. So everything that doesn't allow you to have pleasure and choose pleasure now, because you're so busy finding reasons to deserve pleasure, can we please destroy and uncreate that? Right and wrong, good and bad, pod and poc, online shots, boys and beyonds. Okay, great. Next one is kind of my favorite, kind of a triggering one. It's gonna put a lot of thought into all of your heads. So let's see what you guys think about it. So the fourth reason why we don't choose pleasure in our life is because if you start choosing it, what will people think? What will people think, and how will you deal with so much judgment? Now let me put an example over there. For example, a young woman unfortunately loses her husband, becomes a widow. Okay, and in the next few months or years or whatever, she starts hanging out with her friends, she started her own line of work, and she's doing successful, and she's traveling, and she's kind of gotten the hold of her life. And if she starts choosing pleasure in all these areas of life, what will people think? What will people think that, oh my god, hasn't she moved on too fast? Like, isn't she supposed to be mourning for at least a decade or two? Like, oh my god. So all of those things, when you start, and I know I've taken a very harsh example here about someone losing a loved one, I'm just getting you to the extreme sense of this, that we are so afraid of judgment from people that we'd rather choose trauma so that we are not judged than choose pleasure, because judgment is something we are so afraid of. So we'd like to stick on to that trauma for a considerable amount of time, so that people think, okay, now she's suffered a lot, and now if she's doing something well in her life, now it's okay, now it's kind of justified for her to move on. But we don't want to move on too fast, otherwise people will judge us. So everywhere you are so afraid of judgment, and now you must not choose pleasure because nobody will be able to understand your pleasure, and you're not supposed to have so much fun. So all of the supposed to's, what is this that you're supposed to? Oh my god, can you please destroy and uncreate all of that? Right and wrong, good and bad, pod and poc, online shots, boys and beyonds. And I want to ask you this one simple question, which I want to ask myself in the moment. Okay, so if no one was watching you, and if no one cared a damn about you, and if no one was judging you, how much pleasure would you choose then? If no one was watching, no one was judging, nobody cared, how much pleasure would you choose then? And that, whatever answer comes to your mind, that is exactly what you should choose. We should not diminish, minimize, reduce, cancel out, reject possibilities of pleasure because we are afraid of judgment of other people. People will judge you whether you choose less pleasure, more pleasure. You will be judged left, right, and center in every which way. Okay, so if you're kind of running away from judgment, you'll find it at another corner. Whichever route you take, you will find judgment there. Okay, but is it really cool to give up your pleasure to be able to avoid judgment? I'd rather not choose that. So, all of that, everything, all of the judgments that don't allow you to choose pleasure now, can we destroy and uncreate that? Right and wrong, good and bad, pod and poc, online shots, boys and beyonds. Okay, we've come to our fifth reason, the fifth broad category to why we don't choose pleasure, why we don't maximize our hedonist capacities. And that fifth reason is that we want to maintain our victim identity. So, what happens, the greatness about, not the greatness, the secret benefit of being a victim is that when you are being a victim, you receive a lot of sympathy and empathy. Okay, and a lot of people strive for sympathy and empathy, that I need sympathy and empathy, attention from people to be able to operate. I can't operate without that. Like, if I don't get sympathy, empathy, attention, I can't be alone, I can't be by myself, and I need that to be able to operate in life. Tell me one thing, guys, would you be able to sympathize, empathize with someone who is choosing pleasures in their life? It's not gonna happen. You will only be able to sympathize, empathize with someone when they are operating from a victim identity. So everywhere you are choosing to be a victim in your situations just because you want sympathy and empathy of people, and you're too afraid to choose pleasures because now you'll kind of put those people on an unleash, you'll kind of let go of them. They won't be leashed by your victim energy. You know, victim energy leashes people onto you, and that's why a lot of people choose to be victims. So with that, a lot of people don't want to have pleasure, reason being they will have to let the sympathy and empathy of people go. And how will they deal with that? How will they deal with being by themselves? So all of the times you are choosing victimhood over pleasures of life. Can we please now destroy and uncreate that for good? Right and wrong, good and bad, pod and poc, online shots, boys and beyonds, all the victim identities that you are living with, can we please destroy and uncreate that? Right and wrong, good and bad, pod and poc, online shots, boys and beyonds. Okay, awesome. We have come to the final, the last pointer, the last broad category, which doesn't allow us to be the greatest hedonists. And that is that this entire talk of hedonism and this entire concept of choosing pleasures and choosing joy is all a sham, is all fake, is all bullshit, and is all nonsense. So Aanchal, please don't waste our time telling us about it, because this is a lie and this is not even a possibility. I have a very, very serious life. I have a lot of things to handle. I have responsibilities onto me. I have a family to support, and you don't even know what's going on with me. I am having physical illnesses, blah blah blah. So if that is the space that you are coming from, and you believe that all that I just spoke about right now, the concept of conscious hedonism, if it's coming to you, if it's seeming like a lie to you, then that's the greatest problem here. That is the greatest thing that will not allow you to have it, because you don't even see it as a possibility. You're not even willing to see pleasure as a possibility, because you are so busy in the form and structure of your life. You are so busy trying to support a family, make ends meet, trying to keep your body healthy, trying to work your difficult relationships out. So everywhere you are so stuck in problem solving of your life. Let me repeat that. Everywhere you are so stuck in the problem solving of your life that pleasure seeking is not even a possibility for you. It doesn't even appear like a possibility, and you must go on problem solving to finally receive some pleasure, if that's ever gonna happen. Can you please destroy and uncreate that energy? All the energy of problem solving, can you please just replace that with the energy of pleasure? And what will it take for you? What will it take for all of us to be the greatest hedonists of all time and always see pleasure as a possibility? What will it take for us to choose pleasure eternally in every situation, in all areas of our life, without living this lie that, oh, pleasure is not a possibility for me? And Japjeet asks me, how do I get rid of any of these points of view? Japjeet is my husband, for anyone who is listening to this. Okay, thanks for bringing up that question. How do I get rid of these points of views? Is you have to repeat these clearing statements that I spoke about right now. And always, in every situation, in your work situation, in your difficult relationships, keep asking this question, that what is the possibility of pleasure here that I'm not willing to see? I think that's the easiest way to go about it. Thanks for bringing up that question. Always, in every situation, in your work situation, in your difficult relationships, places where you have lack of ease, places where you have lack of pleasure, you have pain rather than pleasure, just sit with that for a moment and ask, is there a possibility of pleasure here that I'm not being able to see? Is there a possibility of pleasure here? Oops, give me a second, guys. Always seek pleasure. Your job, like, be childlike again. Ask questions. Like, you take a child in a room that has very few toys, just like, very fancy showpieces and stuff. The child will always kind of seek for that thing that can be turned around into a toy, so that they can seek pleasure out of it. And that is our job. Our job is to always see a possibility in things that are dead ends, in things that we conclude are just things that give us pain. So in everything that is a pain to you, in everything that is a difficulty to you, oh, I have to pay this bill, I have to pay this bill, it's going to be so difficult for me to organize money for this bill, and I have to pay for this fees for my for my children's school, and I don't have the right amount of money right now, what do I do? So in that situation, don't get into the trauma of it. Just there ask, is there a possibility of pleasure here? Is there a possibility of pleasure here? Always be willing to invite pleasure. You would never know, you may just get like a monetary gift from someone, or you may just get a great business deal that you weren't expecting. Why? Because when you start asking questions like these, that I want to be the greatest hedonist of all times, universe, make me that, make me the greatest hedonist of all times, and show me the pleasure in this situation that I haven't seen up till now. Expand my awareness and allow me to see the pleasure in this pain. Allow me to see the pleasure in this situation. Allow me to maximize my pleasure and reduce my pain. And when you start talking, when you start communicating with the universe, things show up for you. Things show up for you that are beyond your imagination. And things show up for you which are way beyond your logical perception, because something to do with pleasure is always beyond your logical perception. So try to play this wonderful game of seeking pleasure, being the greatest hedonists of all times. And if this topic gets you very curious, read about the age old philosophies and theories about it, and how these how the criticism of pleasure actually made a lot of people drop the concept of hedonism. Okay, and when I was doing this entire week, I dedicated to this topic, and I had so much fun reading about the philosophies and the ancient stuff about this entire concept. And there were so many points of view that people have thrown about pleasure being bad, and it exists still today. That's the sad part. This theory could be like hundreds of years ago, but the points of view about pleasure being evil, terrible, vicious exists still today. And that is the kind of genetic conditioning that we are being brought up with, that doesn't allow us to be pleasure seekers in the moment. Okay, so if this topic excites you, I'm also actually I was so intrigued by this entire concept of hedonism that I'm planning to come up with a workshop wherein I will be talking about all of these broad categories that I spoke about very much in detail, working with clients one on one in that workshop, trying to see what are those areas where they have chosen more pain, and what are those areas where they're not willing to invite pleasure. So if something like that excites you, please send me a thumbs up right now, so I can actually start working on curating a workshop for you guys. And let's see what that creates. Let's see how much pleasure we can start choosing with that. And it was such a pleasure talking to all of you guys here. And Rise and Shine Gitu asks, is there a possibility of pleasure here? Well, I ask you, how much pleasure are you receiving from this information that I just shared with you? Does it is it giving you this invitation to choose pleasure in your life? Is this giving you this entire new perception to life, from turning your life around from problem solving to pleasure seeking? Do you feel that this conversation has made you take a leap from problem solving to pleasure seeking? If that's a possibility, if that's something that happened for you, then I'm sure this is the greatest pleasure that you could receive. And she says, yes, thank you so much, Gitu, for giving me that validation. And I can see some thumbs ups, and I am so excited. So, looks like this workshop will happen soon, and I will keep you all informed. For any more details, please leave me a DM, anything that you want to know. And it was such a pleasure chit chatting with you guys. Thank you so much for making space for me to speak freely. Thank you so much for being so open with me to accept this kind of information. And I just feel with every letter, every week that we are progressing into the study of consciousness, we're just going so much deeper. The conversations are becoming more valuable. The information that the universe is kind of presenting to me is just getting more grand. I am changing every week, and I hope I am being that little bit of a force of consciousness, a force of change in your lives too. So thank you so much, guys. It was wonderful chatting with you. See you again next week with the letter I, and it will be I for, let's see, I never stick to what I decide I'll speak about. G was supposed to be gratitude, H was supposed to be healing, and G turned out to be gaslighting, H turned out to be hedonism. So I really don't know what it'll be. Let's see. And thank you so much for being here, all of you. See you. Bye.